History is often described as a record of what happened, who mattered, and why. But records are selective by nature. They don't capture everything. They capture what survives, what gets copied, what gets repeated. And repetition has a strange effect. Over time, repetition doesn't just preserve information, it smooths it. Sharp edges disappear. Contradictions fade. Complex people become simple shapes. Not because anyone planned it that way, but because simplicity travels better. A single trait is easier to remember than a full personality. A single decision is easier to teach than a lifetime of context. A single label is easier to repeat than an uncomfortable explanation. So history begins to compress people, slowly, quietly, almost politely, until someone who lived as a contradiction is remembered as a certainty. Someone shaped by doubt becomes a symbol of confidence. Someone defined by hesitation is recalled as decisive. And eventually the person disappears entirely, replaced by a version that fits neatly into a sentence. What makes this difficult to notice is that nothing feels missing. The story still works. It still sounds reasonable. It still explains the outcome, but it no longer explains the human. And once that happens, questioning the story feels unnecessary. After all, the version you're given doesn't feel false. It feels finished. In the next few minutes, we are not correcting dates. We are not arguing trivia. We are doing something far more uncomfortable. We are reopening people. History decided were already understood. And somewhere in this process, you may notice a pattern, not just in the past, but in how stories are still being shaped today. Let's begin with a name that feels inseparable from a place. Cleopatra 7. Say her name and a single image appears almost automatically. Gold, the Nile, hieroglyphs, an Egyptian queen born of Egypt, shaped by Egypt, representing Egypt. That image feels complete. It feels intuitive. And because it feels intuitive, it rarely gets examined. But history didn't misunderstand Cleopatra by accident. It misunderstood her by simplification. Cleopatra ruled Egypt. That part is true. She wore Egyptian crowns. She appeared in Egyptian religious imagery. She aligned herself with Egyptian gods. So the conclusion feels natural. Ruler of Egypt must have been Egyptian. But lineage doesn't follow geography. It follows bloodlines. And Cleopatra's bloodline leads somewhere else entirely. Cleopatra 7 was not ethnically Egyptian. She was Macedonian Greek. Her family, the Ptolemaic dynasty, did not originate in Egypt at all. They arrived there after conquest, when Alexander the Great's empire fractured, and one of his generals, Ptolemy I, claimed Egypt as his prize. That dynasty ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Greek in origin, Greek in culture, Greek in language. Generation after generation they governed Egypt, while remaining socially and ethnically separate from the population they ruled. They spoke Greek in court. They married within their own family to preserve lineage. They maintained Hellenistic traditions. And here is where the story becomes uncomfortable. For most of that dynasty's history, the rulers of Egypt did not even bother to learn the Egyptian language. They governed through translators. They issued decrees in Greek. They lived above the culture they ruled. Cleopatra was different, but not in the way the popular image suggests. She was not Egyptian by birth. She was Egyptian by strategy. Cleopatra 7 was the first of her dynasty to actively learn the Egyptian language, not because it was expected, not because it was tradition, but because she understood something her predecessors didn't. Power doesn't come only from ruling people. It comes from being understood by them. Cleopatra studied Egyptian religion. She positioned herself as the living embodiment of Isis. She spoke directly to priests and citizens in their own tongue. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was political intelligence. And that distinction matters. Because when history remembers Cleopatra as the Egyptian queen, it quietly erases the very thing that made her exceptional. Her effectiveness did not come from belonging to Egypt by birth. It came from choosing to engage with Egypt in a way her family never had. By flattening her identity into a single label, Egyptian, history removes the tension that defined her rule. A foreign ruler, who understood that legitimacy had to be earned, not inherited. A Greek queen, who realized that symbolic alignment was as powerful as military force. A woman operating at the intersection of cultures, not comfortably inside one. But that complexity doesn't survive repetition. Movies dress her as purely Egyptian. Textbooks gloss over the Ptolemaic dynasty entirely. Popular culture fuses geography with identity and moves on. The story becomes easier to tell. And once it's easy, it sticks. What's lost is not a trivia detail. What's lost is the lesson. Cleopatra's real story is not about exotic royalty or ancient glamour. It's about how outsiders rule insiders, about cultural intelligence, about adaptation versus isolation. And that lesson disappears the moment we pretend she was simply Egyptian. This is how misunderstanding begins. Not with lies, but with smoothing. And Cleopatra is only the beginning, because the next figure on this list was not misunderstood because of culture, but because of power, and what history chose to call ambition. The next misunderstanding feels almost immovable. Julius Caesar. His name is used as shorthand for empire, for absolute power, for the moment Rome stopped being a republic and became something else. In everyday language, Caesar doesn't just refer to a person, it refers to a system. Emperors took the name. Titles evolved from it. Even centuries later, echoes remain. So the conclusion feels obvious. Julius Caesar seized power. Julius Caesar ruled absolutely. Julius Caesar created the Roman Empire. But this is where history compresses a process into a person. Caesar did not rule an empire. He never carried the title of emperor in the sense we mean today. And Rome, at the moment of his death, was still, legally, a republic. A strained one, a damaged one, but a republic nonetheless. Understanding this requires slowing down, something popular history rarely does. The Roman Republic had no emperor. Power was divided. Consuls rotated. Offices were temporary by design, meant to prevent exactly the kind of dominance Caesar is remembered for. Caesar did break norms. He crossed the Rubicon. He accepted titles that made senators uneasy. He accumulated influence in ways that felt permanent. But there is a difference between destabilizing a system and replacing it. Caesar never abolished the republic. He never declared a new form of government. He never ruled as a monarch in name or law. What he ruled as was dictator, a legal office within the republic itself. And that word matters. In the Roman context, a dictator was not an emperor. It was an emergency role, temporary, granted during crisis, meant to expire. Caesar extended it, repeated it, pushed it further than comfort allowed. But even at his peak, the republic's institutions still existed around him. The Senate still met. Magistracy still functioned. Elections still occurred, however compromised. This is not a defense of Caesar. It is a correction of scale. History often treats Caesar as the man who ended the republic. But systems do not end in a single stroke. They erode. And erosion is quieter than collapse. Caesar's assassination is often framed as the final act. The tyrant killed to save freedom. But look closely at what followed. The republic did not recover. Violence did not end. Power struggles intensified. If Caesar truly had been the emperor, his death would have restored the old order. Instead, it exposed how hollow that order already was. The Roman Empire did not begin with Julius Caesar. It began later, under someone who learned from Caesar's mistakes. Augustus. Augustus did what Caesar never did. He kept republican language, while quietly removing republican power. He did not shock the system. He reassured it. He refused the title of king. He refused overt domination. He let the Senate believe it still mattered. And in doing so, he built something far more stable than Caesar ever could. The empire was not born from force alone. It was born from patience, from subtlety, from the appearance of continuity. So why does Caesar get the credit or the blame? Because history prefers moments to processes. It's easier to point to a man crossing a river than to decades of institutional decay. It's easier to name a villain than to explain how a republic slowly forgets how to function. Caesar becomes the symbol. Augustus becomes the footnote. And in that inversion, we lose the real lesson. The fall of the Roman Republic was not inevitable because of one man. It was enabled by a system already bending under its own contradictions. Caesar didn't build the empire. He revealed that the old system could no longer hold. And that distinction matters, especially when we talk about power today, because misunderstanding Caesar leads to a dangerous idea that systems fall because of individuals alone. They don't. They fall when individuals exploit weaknesses that already exist, and the next person history misunderstood was not powerful in the traditional sense at all. Yet his misunderstanding reshaped the world, not through politics, but through perception. The next misunderstanding is quieter, almost harmless at first glance. Napoleon Bonaparte. Ask almost anyone to describe him, and one detail arrives immediately. Short, small, compensating. It's become a joke more than a fact. A personality trait masquerading as a physical one. So common that it barely feels like history at all. Just background knowledge. But this is one of the most revealing misunderstandings on this list, because it shows how easily ridicule replaces reality. Napoleon Bonaparte was not short. By the standards of his time, he was unremarkably average. He stood around 5 feet 6 or 7 inches, by modern measurement, well within the norm for late 18th and early 19th century European men. So how did one of the most powerful figures in European history become permanently reduced to a punchline about height? The answer has very little to do with Napoleon himself, and everything to do with narrative. During Napoleon's rise, Britain was not just fighting a military opponent, it was fighting an image. Wars aren't won only on battlefields. They're won in newspapers, pamphlets, cartoons. British propaganda depicted Napoleon as small, petulant, overcompensating. The visual message was simple. This man is not a threat. Make him look ridiculous, and you weaken the fear surrounding him. Political cartoons exaggerated his stature. They shrank his body while inflating his ambition. They turned strategic brilliance into personal insecurity. Over time, the image stuck. But propaganda alone doesn't explain why the myth survived so completely. There was also confusion, quieter, more technical, but just as damaging. Napoleon's height was recorded in French units, not British ones. A French inch was longer than a British inch. A French foot was not the same measurement as an English foot. When later historians and translators converted his height, without adjusting for the unit difference, Napoleon appeared shorter on paper than he actually was in life. A small error, repeated often, and repetition once again did the rest. The myth hardened. Then came comparison. Napoleon was frequently surrounded by his imperial guard, men selected specifically for their size and presence. Standing next to unusually tall soldiers will make almost anyone look small. But context disappears in memory. All that remains is contrast. Short man, big ambition. And once that idea takes hold, it begins to explain everything retroactively. His aggression, compensation. His confidence, overcorrection. His authority, insecurity dressed as command. A complex political and military figure is psychologically flattened into a stereotype. And here's where the misunderstanding becomes dangerous. Because when we reduce Napoleon to a caricature, we stop asking serious questions about power. We stop examining how he reorganized Europe, how he reformed legal systems, how he mobilized nationalism, how he reshaped warfare. Instead we laugh, and laughter is disarming. It turns influence into personality, structure into psychology, history into trivia. Napoleon wasn't remembered incorrectly because people lacked information. He was remembered incorrectly because the wrong detail was easier to repeat. Short is memorable. Average for his era is not. And so the myth persists, not because it's convincing, but because it's convenient. This is how misunderstanding evolves. Not through ignorance, but through preference. Preference for stories that feel complete. Preference for explanations that require no context. Preference for myths that turn history into entertainment. And once again, a person disappears. Replaced not by a lie, but by a joke. The next figure on this list was misunderstood in a very different way. Not reduced, but exaggerated, to the point where his wealth became almost mythical, and the real story behind it was lost. Pause, slightly longer. The next name is remembered almost entirely as an exaggeration. Mansa Musa. Today he's often introduced with a superlative, the richest man in history. So wealthy that modern comparisons collapse under the scale. Gold everywhere, caravans stretching beyond sight, a fortune so vast it feels fictional. And then comes the familiar ending. He gave away so much gold that he crashed entire economies. It sounds unbelievable, almost mythic, like a cautionary tale about excess. But unlike many misunderstandings, this one is rooted in something real. Mansa Musa did distribute extraordinary amounts of gold. During his pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, he traveled with an immense entourage, thousands of attendants, camels loaded with gold. As he passed through North Africa, particularly Cairo, he gave generously, not symbolically, not modestly. He gave openly, freely, at a scale the region had never experienced. And the result was measurable. Gold flooded local markets. Its value dropped. Prices rose. Inflation followed, not for days or weeks, but for years. In some areas, the economic disruption lasted more than a decade. So yes, generosity broke economies. But this is where history stops too early, because focusing only on the spectacle misses the structure beneath it. Mansa Musa did not accidentally destroy economies, because he was careless or ignorant. He operated from a different economic reality. The Mali Empire was one of the world's richest regions, not because it hoarded gold, but because it controlled its flow. Gold in Mali was abundant. Its value was regulated internally. Its scarcity elsewhere was not his concern. When Mansa Musa entered foreign markets, he introduced a supply shock so extreme that existing systems couldn't absorb it. This wasn't personal extravagance, it was structural imbalance. And here's the detail that rarely survives repetition. Mansa Musa later attempted to reverse the damage. He borrowed gold back at high interest to remove excess supply from circulation, an early and costly form of monetary correction. That part of the story rarely gets told, because generosity caused inflation is easier to remember. Then complex economic systems collapsed under sudden abundance. History turns Musa into a parable. Too rich, too generous, too much. But that framing strips away what truly mattered. Mansa Musa was not just wealthy. He was a state builder. Under his rule, Mali became a center of learning. He invested in mosques, universities, libraries. He brought scholars, architects, and teachers into West Africa. Timbuktu did not become legendary by accident. It became legendary through deliberate investment. But those details don't travel as far as gold. Gold dazzles. Gold simplifies. And so Mansa Musa becomes a symbol of excess, rather than a ruler navigating a global economy that wasn't prepared for his scale. Once again, misunderstanding isn't born from falsehood. It's born from emphasis. History chooses the most dramatic consequence and forgets the broader context. And when that happens, we lose the lesson. The lesson isn't that generosity is dangerous. The lesson is that power, especially economic power, doesn't exist in isolation. Systems react, markets adjust, consequences ripple. Mansa Musa didn't break economies because he was reckless. He exposed how fragile those economies already were when faced with sudden change. And the next person history misunderstood also exposed a fragile system, not through wealth, not through war, but through a mistake that reshaped the world's understanding of geography itself. The next misunderstanding is so deeply embedded that correcting it feels almost disruptive. Christopher Columbus. His name is tied to a sentence many people can recite without effort. Discovered America. Sailed west. Changed the world. Feels definitive. Close. Settled. But almost every part of that idea collapses the moment it's examined carefully. Christopher Columbus never reached what we now call America. He never set foot in what is today the United States. Not once. Not accidentally. Not at the end of a journey lost to history. His voyages took him to the Caribbean, to islands in the Bahamas, to parts of present-day Cuba and Hispaniola. That geography matters, because the misunderstanding isn't just about location. It's about intention and belief. Columbus did not believe he had discovered a new continent. Not during his voyages. Not at the end of his life. He believed he had reached Asia. More specifically, he believed he was near the eastern edges of Asia, islands close to India, China, or Japan. That belief never left him, even as evidence mounted, even as geography refused to cooperate, even as the lands he encountered failed to align with any known Asian descriptions. Columbus adjusted the map in his mind, rather than the conclusion, and history followed him. When Columbus returned to Europe, his reports did not announce a new world. They described familiar places under unfamiliar circumstances. Spices were missing, but that could be explained. Silk wasn't present, but trade routes vary. The people didn't resemble Asians, but distance distorts culture. Each contradiction was rationalized, because admitting a new continent would have meant admitting a catastrophic miscalculation. Columbus had underestimated the size of the Earth. Badly. His westward route worked, not because his math was correct, but because something unexpected was in the way. But that unexpected reality, an entirely separate set of continents, was not immediately accepted. And here is where history simplifies again. Later generations needed a starting point, a name, a face. Discovered America. was easier to teach, then initiated sustained European contact with parts of the Caribbean, while fundamentally misunderstanding where he was. So the sentence changed. The complexity vanished, and Columbus became something he never claimed to be. He died believing he had reached the edges of Asia, not metaphorically, literally. His final years were spent arguing for recognition. Based on that belief, he never corrected the record, because he didn't think it needed correction. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the man himself didn't know what he had reached, why are we so certain? The misunderstanding of Columbus reveals something deeper about how history assigns credit. It prefers outcomes over intentions, results over understanding. Yes, Columbus's voyages had enormous consequences. Global trade shifted. Empires expanded. Entire populations were altered, often catastrophically. But consequences do not retroactively grant awareness. Columbus did not discover America, in the way the phrase implies. He did not recognize it as new. He did not understand its scale. He did not conceptualize it as separate from Asia. That realization came later, through other explorers, cartographers, and thinkers. But Columbus became the symbol, not because he understood what he found, but because history needed a clean narrative. And once again, a person is compressed into a moment they didn't fully grasp. This misunderstanding isn't harmless. It shapes how discovery is framed, who gets credit, whose presence is erased. By focusing on Columbus as the discoverer, entire civilizations that already lived on those lands are reduced to background. The story begins where it's convenient, and convenience, once repeated often enough, feels like truth. This is the pattern we've been following. Cleopatra simplified into nationality, Caesar compressed into empire, Napoleon reduced to stature, Mansa Musa exaggerated into excess, Columbus flattened into discovery. Different lives, different eras, same distortion. History doesn't misunderstand people loudly. It misunderstands them quietly, by sanding away everything that doesn't fit. And now that you've seen the pattern, the question changes. It's no longer who history misunderstood. It becomes why it keeps happening, and whether we're still doing it now. Next, Albert Einstein wasn't bad at math. The image of Albert Einstein is familiar. Wild hair, absent-minded expression, a genius who somehow struggled with the basics. Bad at math, terrible in school. Proof that brilliance can bloom, even when formal education fails. It's an encouraging story. And like most encouraging stories in history, it's incomplete. Albert Einstein was not bad at mathematics. He was exceptional at it. From a young age, Einstein demonstrated advanced mathematical ability. He taught himself algebra and geometry, years ahead of his classmates. By his early teens, he was already working through calculus. This is not speculation. It's documented. So how did one of the greatest mathematical minds of all time become associated with failure in the very subject that defined his work? The answer lies in interpretation, and the danger of reading records without understanding context. Einstein's school records did not show poor performance in mathematics. They showed something else entirely. In the Swiss education system of his time, grading scales changed. What once indicated high achievement was later misread as low performance. When converted incorrectly, numbers were reversed, standards shifted, context disappeared. The top score became a failure, only on paper, and only decades later. But paperwork alone didn't cement the myth. Personality did. Einstein clashed with authority. He disliked rigid instruction. He questioned teachers openly. He resisted rote memorization. That resistance was mistaken for inability. History often assumes that struggle with structure equals struggle with skill. It doesn't. Einstein didn't struggle with mathematics. He struggled with conformity. And this distinction matters, because when we say Einstein was bad at math, we turn a disciplined, deeply trained thinker into a symbol of effortless genius, as if his ideas appeared spontaneously, as if equations were incidental, as if rigor wasn't required. That version of Einstein is comforting, because it lowers the bar. It suggests brilliance is accidental, that mastery is optional, that confusion is a prerequisite for insight. But the real story is more demanding. Einstein's breakthroughs were not flashes of magic. They were the result of sustained mathematical engagement. Relativity is not poetry. It is structure. It is precision. It is equations carried to their limits. By misunderstanding Einstein's relationship with math, We misunderstand genius itself. We begin to think ideas matter more than execution. That vision is enough without discipline. And that belief spreads quietly. Students repeat the story. Teachers soften expectations. Effort becomes negotiable. A myth meant to inspire ends up distorting reality. Once again, history simplifies. A complex figure, one who combined imagination with relentless calculation, is flattened into a stereotype. The rebel genius, the misunderstood student, the exception that proves the rule. But Einstein was not an exception. He was a reminder that questioning authority doesn't mean rejecting knowledge, that disliking a system doesn't mean lacking skill, and that mastery often hides behind stories we prefer more than the truth. This is the same pattern we've seen before. Cleopatra reduced to birthplace. Caesar blamed for an empire he didn't found. Napoleon mocked into insecurity. Mansa Musa exaggerated into spectacle. Columbus credited with understanding he never had. And now Einstein, recast not as a master of mathematics, but as a genius who somehow escaped it. History doesn't just misunderstand people by exaggerating their flaws. Sometimes, it misunderstands them by removing the work. And that may be the most misleading distortion of all. Because if effort disappears from the story, what remains feels unreachable. And the next person history misunderstood wasn't simplified into failure or excess. They were misunderstood because history needed a villain, and complexity was inconvenient. This next misunderstanding doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to an image so persistent that it feels ancient, as if it survived directly from the past itself. Vikings, fierce, northern, battle-hardened, and almost immediately, the helmet appears. Iron, heavy, curved horns jutting outward, like a warning. It feels authentic, it feels earned, and it is completely wrong. Vikings did not wear horned helmets, not in battle, not in ceremony, not in daily life. No archaeological evidence supports it. No burial site, no battlefield find, no surviving helmet from the Viking age has ever been discovered with horns attached, because horns would have been impractical, dangerous, a liability in combat. They add weight. They create leverage points for an opponent. They obstruct movement. They serve no tactical purpose. The real helmets Vikings used were functional, simple iron or leather, sometimes conical, often reinforced, built for survival, not spectacle. So where did the horns come from? Not from history, from performance. In the 19th century, as Europe romanticized its past, Vikings were reinvented, not studied. Opera productions needed visual shorthand. Costume designers needed silhouettes that read instantly from a distance. Horns were added, not because they were accurate, but because they were dramatic. And drama spreads faster than evidence. Paintings followed. Illustrations copied illustrations. Stage costumes bled into textbooks. Textbooks bled into pop culture. Eventually the image hardened. By the time archaeology caught up, the horns were already permanent. This is how misunderstanding becomes tradition. No one sat down and decided to deceive future generations. The mistake simply repeated itself until it stopped feeling like a mistake. And once something feels old enough, we stop asking where it came from. The horned helmet became a symbol, not of Vikings, but of how history is aestheticized. Savage, primitive, exotic. The image says more about the people who invented it than the people it claims to represent. Real Vikings were traders, explorers, farmers, craftsmen. They navigated complex political systems, established trade routes spanning continents, built ships so advanced they reshaped naval travel for centuries. But none of that fits neatly into a cartoon. So history traded complexity for costume. And once again, a real group of people vanished, replaced by a fantasy version that was easier to recognize. This misunderstanding matters because it reveals something subtle. When history becomes entertainment, accuracy becomes optional. The louder the image, the quieter the truth. And the Vikings are not unique in this. They are simply one of the clearest examples of how visuals overpower evidence. A single costume decision outlived centuries of scholarship. And now, even when corrected, the image survives, because correction requires effort, and repetition does not. This is the same pattern we've been tracing. Not lies, but substitutions. Not deception, but convenience. And the next person history misunderstood wasn't reshaped by costume or propaganda. but by a story, so widely repeated, that questioning it feels almost impolite. Part 8. George Washington didn't have wooden teeth. This sounds symbolic. George Washington, wooden teeth. The image is simple, almost poetic. A founding figure with a crude imperfection, a reminder of humility in an age of power. Feels like the kind of detail history would preserve intentionally, but it isn't true. George Washington did not have wooden teeth. Not once, not partially, not early, late, or in between. What he had were dentures, and they were far more disturbing than the myth allows. Washington's dentures were made from a mixture of materials: ivory, metal, animal teeth, and, in some cases, human teeth. They were engineered objects, custom-built, adjustable, complex, held together with springs and wires, painful to wear, difficult to maintain. Nothing about them was rustic. So how did wood enter the story? Not through material, but through appearance. Ivory stains over time. It darkens. It absorbs residue. It takes on a grain-like texture as it ages. To later observers, Washington's dentures looked wooden, and looking wooden became being wooden. Once again, repetition completed the transformation. The myth stuck because it was easier to remember than the truth. Wooden teeth fits in a sentence. Dentures constructed from ivory, metal, and human teeth in the 18th century does not. But the simplification hides something important. Washington's dental problems were severe. They caused constant discomfort, affected his speech, shaped his expressions. Portraits of Washington often show tight lips, rigid posture, controlled emotion, not because he lacked warmth, but because he was in pain. That detail matters, because when history reduces Washington's dentures to wood, it removes the human cost. It turns suffering into symbolism, and it softens the reality of the era he lived in. Dentistry at the time relied on extraction, often without anesthesia. Human teeth were bought from the poor, from enslaved people, from those with no leverage to refuse. That context rarely survives the joke. The wooden teeth myth doesn't just misunderstand Washington, it erases an entire system beneath him. The economics of bodies, the limits of medicine, the realities of 18th century life, beneath polished ideals. And this is where misunderstanding becomes comfortable. The truth is messy, uneasy, ethically complicated. The myth is clean, so the myth wins. Washington becomes a symbol again. Stoic, foundational, simplified. Not a man navigating pain, technology, and compromise, but a caricature with a quirky flaw. History does this often. When reality feels too heavy, it replaces it with something lighter, something easier to teach, easier to repeat, easier to laugh at. And once again, the person disappears. Cleopatra lost her strategy. Caesar lost his context. Napoleon lost his scale. Mansa Musa lost his systems. Columbus lost his misunderstanding. Einstein lost his discipline. The Vikings lost their reality. Washington lost his humanity. And the next misunderstanding on this list is different again. Not about material, not about image, but about knowledge itself, and how confidently it can be claimed, while being fundamentally wrong. Next on the list is Marie Antoinette. In a starving population, empty bread shelves, anger rising, and a queen distant and untouched, responding with a sentence that has followed her for centuries. Let them eat cake. It's a perfect line. Sure. Dismissive. Effortless. So perfect, in fact, that it never needed proof. But Marie Antoinette never said it. Not in public. Not in private. Not recorded by friend or enemy. The phrase existed long before she did. Versions of it appear in French literature, years earlier, used as a generic example of aristocratic ignorance, a fictional remark assigned to unnamed nobles to criticize detachment from reality. By the time Marie Antoinette arrived in France, as a young Austrian teenager, the phrase was already in circulation, waiting, and when history needed a villain, it found a line ready-made. Marie Antoinette was foreign. She was young. She represented excess. In a system collapsing under inequality, she became a symbol, before she became a decision-maker, and symbols attract blame. The French Revolution was not sparked by a single sentence. It was fueled by debt, bad harvest, systemic imbalance, and decades of resentment. But complexity doesn't travel well. A quote does. So the sentence moved from fiction to fact, from anonymity to attribution. and Marie Antoinette absorbed it completely. What makes this misunderstanding endure is not that people believe she was cruel. It's that the quote confirms what they already think. Fits the narrative. Detached royalty, tone-deaf privilege, callous response. The line doesn't need to be true to feel accurate. And once something feels accurate, evidence becomes optional. But here's the quieter detail history often skips. Marie Antoinette was not indifferent to hunger. She supported charitable efforts. She reduced court expenses later in life. She was constrained by systems far larger than herself. None of that absolves monarchy. None of it rewrites inequality. But it does restore proportion. Because when we assign structural failures to individual quotes, we misunderstand power. We turn systems into personalities, and personalities are easier to condemn. Marie Antoinette didn't become infamous because of what she did. She became infamous because she was available, a visible face for invisible forces. The phrase "let them eat cake" was never about her. It was about resentment, seeking a voice. And once again, history obliged. This is the same pattern repeating. A line replaces a life. A symbol replaces a system. A person becomes shorthand for something far larger and far messier. Cleopatra became a nationality. Caesar became an empire. Napoleon became a joke. Mansa Musa became excess. Columbus became discovery. Einstein became accidental genius. Vikings became costumes. Washington became wooden. Marie Antoinette became a sentence. And sentences are dangerous. They feel complete. They feel final. They feel like understanding. But understanding rarely fits into a single line. The final misunderstanding on this list is not about a person's actions. It's about a book, and how a warning was transformed into an accusation. Niccolò Machiavelli. Say his name today, and it doesn't describe a man. It describes a trait called manipulative, ruthless, evil dressed as intelligence. Machiavellian. It sounds definitive, as if cruelty itself had an author. But Machiavelli did not set out to teach evil. He set out to describe power, as it actually functioned. And that difference is everything. When Machiavelli wrote The Prince, Italy was fragmented, unstable, and perpetually invaded. City-states rose and fell quickly. Alliances shifted overnight. Leaders who ruled gently were often removed violently. This was not a theoretical environment. It was survival politics. Machiavelli wasn't asking how rulers should behave in a perfect world. He was asking how rulers did behave in the real one, and why pretending otherwise kept getting people killed. The Prince was not a moral handbook. It was an autopsy, a study of failed idealism, a catalog of political realities that polite philosophy avoided. When Machiavelli wrote that it is safer to be feared than loved, he wasn't endorsing cruelty as virtue. He was pointing out a pattern. Love is fragile. Fear is predictable. That observation made people uncomfortable, especially those who preferred power to look virtuous. So the message was rebranded. Analysis became advocacy. Description became instruction. Centuries later, Machiavellian emerged, not as an academic term, but as an insult, detached from context, detached from history, detached from intent. And once again, a complex thinker was flattened. Machiavelli didn't celebrate manipulation. He warned about it. He didn't invent political cruelty. He documented its effectiveness and its cost. He understood that pretending power was gentle did not make it so, but that honesty came at a price, because societies prefer moral stories to accurate ones. We like to believe evil is chosen deliberately, not rewarded systematically. We like villains to look monstrous, not reasonable. Machiavelli disrupted that comfort, so history punished him for it. By turning his name into a synonym for immorality, we avoided engaging with his real argument, that power operates independently of virtue, and ignoring that fact doesn't make the world kinder, only more dangerous. This is the same mechanism we've seen throughout this entire journey. Cleopatra was simplified into identity, Caesar into causation, Napoleon into ridicule, Mansa Musa into excess, Columbus into certainty, Einstein into effortless genius, Vikings into fantasy, Washington into symbolism, Marie Antoinette into a sentence, and Machiavelli into malice. 10 distortions, not because history is malicious, but because it is impatient. It prefers shortcuts to understanding, labels to context, conclusions to questions. And once a label is applied often enough, it becomes invisible. You stop seeing it as interpretation. You start seeing it as truth. This is why history keeps misunderstanding people. Because people are inconvenient. They hesitate. They contradict themselves. They act within systems they didn't design. Symbols are easier. But symbols don't teach us how power works, how influence spreads, how myths are born. People do. And if history keeps getting them wrong, the danger isn't in the past. It's in how confidently we repeat those misunderstandings. In the present, now the question isn't whether history misunderstood them. It's whether we're willing to notice when it does, and whether we're still doing it right now.